In the silence between centuries, there are questions that echo longer than others. Not loud, not urgent, but persistent. Like the slow drift of ice across a frozen sea, they accumulate over time, gathering weight beneath the surface of what we think we know. Imagine this, a map drawn long before the age of satellites, before airplanes, before even the compass was fully trusted. A map inked by candlelight in a world that believed the ocean's edge might drop into nothingness. And yet, there, sketched along its margins, is a landmass that looks uncannily like Antarctica. Not as we know it today, a continent locked beneath miles of ice, but as if someone had seen it bare, unfrozen, exposed. It sounds impossible, and perhaps it is. But the idea lingers, not because of wild claims or ancient alien theories, but because of a few curious lines on very old paper. Lines that, to some eyes, seem to trace coastlines that should not have been known for hundreds of years. This is not a story about proving lost civilizations or rewriting history with flourish. It's quieter than that. It's about how humans make sense of fragments, how we connect dots across time, sometimes accurately, sometimes not. It's about the tension between wonder and evidence, between the allure of mystery and the discipline of inquiry. Antarctica, as science tells us, has been under ice for millions of years, long before the first pyramids rose, long before the wheel turned in Mesopotamia. So how could any map from the 15th or 16th century show its true shape? That question, posed without agenda, is where we begin. In 1929, in the quiet halls of Istanbul's Topkapi Palace, a discovery sent ripples through both scholarly and popular circles. Among forgotten Ottoman archives, a fragment of a world map was found, drawn in 1513 by a Turkish admiral named Piri Reis. At first glance, it was remarkable for its time, showing parts of Europe, Africa, and the newly encountered Americas with surprising detail. But what captured imaginations most was a curious landmass extending from the southern edge of the Atlantic. To modern eyes, that southern extension bore a vague resemblance to the outline of Queen Maud Land, the eastern coast of Antarctica. This observation gained traction in the mid-20th century, particularly after a letter from a U.S. Navy officer noted the similarity. From there, speculation bloomed. Could this 16th century map really depict an ice-free Antarctica? Let us be clear. The Piri Reis map is a masterpiece of early cartography, not because it reveals hidden continents, but because it reflects the synthesis of knowledge available in its era. Piri Reis himself wrote that he compiled his map from about 20 older sources, including Portuguese sea charts, Arab maps, and even a map drawn by Christopher Columbus. None of those sources, as far as we know, included data from the Southern Ocean beyond the known trade routes. What appears to some as Antarctica is more likely a stylized or distorted representation of the South American coastline, extended southward in keeping with the geographic assumptions of the time. Medieval and Renaissance mapmakers often filled unknown regions with speculative landmasses, driven by classical theories that balanced the northern continents with the great Terra Australis, a southern continent thought necessary for cosmic symmetry. The Piri Reis map does not label this region as Antarctica. It wasn't even named until the 1800s, nor does it show interior features that match geological surveys, yet its very existence invites reflection, not on lost civilizations, but on how knowledge travels, mutates, and sometimes surprises us across centuries. The Piri Reis map is not alone in fueling speculation. In the centuries that followed, other maps appeared to show southern landmasses with uncanny detail. Among them, two stand out: the 1531 map by French cartographer Oronce Finet, often Latinized as Orontius Phineus, and the world maps of Gerardus Mercator from the late 1500s. Finet's map depicts a large southern continent, labeled Terra Australis, ringed by mountain ranges and rivers. Its shape, when overlaid with modern Antarctic coastlines, seems to some observers eerily aligned, especially around the Ross Sea and Weddell Sea regions. Mercator, too, included a substantial southern landmass in his influential 1569 projection, describing it as necessary to balance the known lands of the north. But context matters deeply here. These maps were not drawn from direct observation. They were intellectual constructions, rooted in ancient philosophy more than empirical data. The idea of Terra Australis dates back to Aristotle and Ptolemy, who reasoned that the Earth's northern lands must be counterbalanced by southern ones to maintain equilibrium. This concept persisted for over 1,800 years, not as proven fact, but as elegant theory. Moreover, the coastlines on these maps often bear little resemblance to Antarctica upon closer inspection. Features are exaggerated, rotated, or conflated with South American or Australian shores. The supposed accuracy frequently relies on selective interpretation, matching one segment while ignoring mismatches elsewhere. Historians of cartography emphasize that these maps were meant to convey cosmological order, navigational guidance, and political claims, not photographic realism. Crucially, no known pre-18th century map labels or locates Antarctica as we define it today. The first confirmed sighting of the continent occurred in 1820 by Russian and British expeditions. Until then, Terra Australis remained a placeholder, a hypothesis rendered in ink. So when we see these old maps, we are not looking at records of forgotten voyages to an ice-free pole. We are witnessing the human mind grappling with the unknown, using the tools of symmetry, tradition, and imagination. And that in itself is a kind of truth, just not the one mystery seekers often hope for. To understand these maps, we must step into the world that made them. Long before GPS or aerial photography, cartographers stitched together knowledge from travelers' tales, sailors' logs, merchant reports, and inherited manuscripts. Accuracy was not measured in meters, but in utility. Could this map guide a ship to port? Could it impress a king? Could it reflect divine or cosmic order? In the medieval Islamic world, scholars like Al-Idrisi in the 12th century compiled geographic data from traders crossing the Sahara and sailors navigating the Indian Ocean. Their maps blended observation with classical sources, often prioritizing symbolic harmony over precise scale. In Europe, monastic scribes preserved fragments of Ptolemy's Geographia even as coastlines shifted in reality and legend. By the Renaissance, portolan charts, nautical maps based on compass bearings and estimated distances began to circulate among Mediterranean sailors. These were remarkably accurate for regional navigation, but offered little beyond known trade routes. When new lands appeared, like the Americas, they were often squeezed into existing frameworks, rotated or mirrored to fit expectations. Crucially, longitude remained a profound challenge. Without accurate timekeeping at sea, east-west positioning was guesswork. Distances were estimated by dead reckoning, counting days sailed, factoring wind and current. Errors compounded quickly. A coastline might be drawn hundreds of miles off or stretched to fill by space on a vellum sheet. Mapmakers also copied from one another, sometimes for centuries. A single misinterpretation could echo through dozens of maps. If one chart showed a speculative southern continent, others might replicate it, not out of deception, but because it was part of the accepted geographic canon. Thus, when we see a landmass resembling Antarctica on a 16th century map, it is more likely the product of layered assumptions than secret surveys. It reflects a world where knowledge was fragmented, transmission imperfect, and the unknown filled with reasoned conjecture. The map was not a mirror of the Earth. It was a conversation across time, full of pauses, misunderstandings, and moments of insight. If ancient maps truly depicted an ice-free Antarctica, they would imply something extraordinary, that humans witnessed the continent before it was buried under ice. But what does geology tell us about when that ice formed? The scientific consensus is clear. Antarctica has been largely ice-covered for millions of years. Sediment cores extracted from the ocean floor around the continent, along with ice core data from deep within its glaciers, reveal a timeline stretching back over 34 million years. Around that time, during the transition from the Eocene to the Oligocene epoch, global temperatures dropped significantly. Carbon dioxide levels fell, and Antarctica began to glaciate. By about 15 million years ago, the continent was almost entirely encased in ice. Even during warmer interglacial periods like the one we're in now, the interior remained frozen. The last time significant portions of coastal Antarctica may have been ice-free was during the Pliocene, roughly 3 to 5 million years ago, when sea levels were much higher. But even then, human ancestors were not yet present. Homo sapiens would not appear for another 2.9 million years. Crucially, there is no geological evidence of widespread deglaciation in the last 100,000 years, let alone the last few thousand. Satellite radar and seismic surveys show that the bedrock beneath the ice matches known tectonic features, but there are no signs of recent exposure to weathering or erosion that would suggest a recent ice-free period. Moreover, if a sophisticated civilization had mapped Antarctica before it froze, we would expect to find other traces, tools, settlements, written records, or consistent global myths describing such a land. None exist. The archaeological record shows no human presence on the continent until the 19th century. This doesn't diminish the wonder of Antarctica, it amplifies it. That this vast, silent expanse has remained hidden beneath ice longer than our species has walked. The Earth speaks to the immense scales of geologic time. It reminds us that some mysteries are not puzzles to be solved, but thresholds to stand before in quiet awe. And so, when we compare old maps to modern satellite imagery, we must remember, resemblance is not evidence, correlation is not causation, and time in its deepest currents moves far beyond the span of human memory. When we look at an old map and see Antarctica, what are we really seeing? Often, it is not the land itself, but our own mind reaching for meaning. The human brain is wired to find patterns, even where none exist. This tendency, called apophenia, helps us recognize faces in clouds and constellations and stars. It also leads us to see familiar shapes in ambiguous lines. Consider the challenge of projecting a spherical world onto flat parchment. Every map distorts reality in some way, stretching, compressing, or rotating land masses to fit a two-dimensional plane. The Piri Reis map, for instance, uses a portolan-style projection that works well for the Mediterranean, but becomes increasingly speculative toward the edges. Southern coastlines may appear correct only because they've been rotated, mirrored, or scaled to match modern expectations after the fact. Moreover, many so-called accurate depictions rely on selective overlaying. Advocates might align one segment of an old coastline with a modern Antarctic feature while ignoring mismatches elsewhere. But true cartographic accuracy requires consistent scale, orientation, and proportional relationships across the entire map, not just a coincidental curve here or there. Historians note that Renaissance maps often extended South America far beyond its actual tip, sometimes connecting it to a hypothetical southern continent. These extensions were not based on exploration, but on theoretical geography. When such a shape vaguely echoes parts of Antarctica's outline, it is more likely coincidence amplified by hindsight than evidence of ancient surveying. Even the concept of coastline is fluid. Glaciers calve, ice shelves collapse, and sea levels rise. The edge of Antarctica today is not the same as it was a century ago, let alone thousands of years ago. To claim that a 16th century sketch matches the modern bedrock coastline, which lies buried under ice, requires assuming both impossible knowledge and perfect transmission across lost civilizations. In truth, the real marvel is not that these maps knew Antarctica, but that they reveal how humans, across cultures and centuries, have tried to make sense of the world with the tools they had. Their errors are not failures, they are footprints of curiosity. And sometimes, in our eagerness to find hidden truths, we overlook the more profound truth already present, the enduring human desire to understand, to map, to reach beyond the known, even if we occasionally misread the signs along the way. There is a quiet humility in standing before the unknown, not the kind that surrenders to mystery, but the kind that respects it, acknowledging the limits of what we can know while still reaching toward understanding. Maps, in their essence, are acts of this humility. They say, here is what we have seen, here is what we think lies beyond, and here at the edge is where we stop and wonder. For centuries, cartographers marked uncharted regions with phrases like "Hic sunt dracones," "Here be dragons." These were not admissions of fear, but honest declarations of uncertainty. They knew the world was larger than their knowledge, and they left space for it. Today, we no longer draw dragons on our maps, but we still fill voids with stories. When we see a coastline that resembles Antarctica on a 500-year-old parchment, we are not just interpreting ink. We are projecting our hopes that knowledge is cyclical, that wisdom endures, that someone long ago saw what we are only now beginning to understand. But perhaps the deeper truth lies not in what the map shows, but in why we look so closely. In an age of instant answers and global connectivity, the idea of a secret waiting in plain sight offers a rare kind of solace. It suggests that not everything has been cataloged, optimized, or explained away. That mystery still exists, not as a flaw in our knowledge, but as a feature of reality itself. And maybe that's enough. We don't need ancient mariners to have sailed past icebergs to find meaning in these maps. Their value lies in what they reveal about us, our longing for connection across time, our reverence for those who tried to make sense of the world with compass and courage, and our enduring belief that the Earth still holds quiet truths, waiting not to be uncovered by conspiracy, but to be approached with patience, care, and intellectual honesty. In the end, the greatest maps are not those that claim to show everything, but those that remind us how much remains unseen. So where does this leave us? With a map that may or may not resemble a frozen continent, with questions that echo longer than answers, and with something perhaps more valuable, perspective. The story of ancient maps is not a puzzle to be solved, but a mirror held up to our own curiosity. It shows us how knowledge is built, not in sudden revelations, but through generations of observation, error, revision, and transmission. It reminds us that every map is both a record and a guess, shaped by the limits of its time and the hopes of its maker. Antarctica remains one of Earth's last true wildernesses, a place of silence, scale, and scientific wonder. We now know it has slept beneath ice for millions of years, long before humans walked upright. No ancient mariner charted its shores, no lost civilization mapped its rivers, and yet, the idea that someone might have done so speaks to a timeless human impulse, to believe that the world still holds secrets and that we are capable of uncovering them. But real discovery doesn't require rewriting history. It requires looking closely, without agenda, at what is there. At the careful lines of Piri Reis, not as proof of the impossible, but as testament to a world stitching itself together through shared knowledge. At the Terra Australis of Renaissance maps, not as a hidden truth, but as a beautiful hypothesis, born of logic and longing. In the end, the most honest response to these old maps is not certainty, but humility. Humility to say, we don't know everything. Humility to admit, this might just be coincidence. And humility to recognize, that's okay, because mystery is not the enemy of understanding, it is its companion. And as long as we approach the past with open eyes and open minds, the story of human knowledge will keep unfolding, one careful line at a time. Thank you for joining this journey through history, maps, and the quiet power of curiosity. If you enjoyed it, subscribe to Ancient History Secrets, where the past isn't just uncovered, but understood.